Hello, hello, hello.
You're fine. He just passed her exams and she's filling out all their stuff. And we have literature back here for the class. Thanks.
This one feels thick. Did I give it two?
Enjoy the class. Enjoy your class, guys. I don't know what view he wants.
Yeah, well, I just keep the classroom on, right?
What do you usually do?
The classroom. Why am I so small?
Yeah, that's sure.
Why is it so small?
Uh, Your screen, you put it on?
This.
So you click that to that.
Yeah, that's,
Oh, to the bottom. Oh, go to the bottom of that square. To a corner.
Yeah.
Where does it? Right, click and drag. There we go.
there's really nobody to see because it's, your audio's on.
You know what? There's nothing you could do. I can still function, so I'm good. It's just stairs. So I'll go up on my butt. Like you do with the babies.
Is everyone getting their pamphlet? Their literature over here? How about if I put it here so I can see it? Let's go. How is, oh, do I have like followed in it?
Yeah, just one piece that was not getting that.
So how is Utah? He's good. He's all bathed in French.
Ready for the holidays. You good?
I'm live. You know how to get to the website thing? I can try.
Yeah.
This cursor goes like 100 miles an hour. Tell you what, I'll be right back. I'm gonna go look at it. Yeah.
Who would like to be in charge of the microphone if anyone has a question? It's muted now. All right, we'll leave it up here. We'll let David work on that one for you. He's got two here. Enjoy it. I'll be listening. And did you, yes, you got, everybody's got them?
But it's you. Take notes, Linda, in case I fall asleep.
You sure? When you, well, see if the magic works.
Never lose these, otherwise I'm dead. Definitely.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hoffman. Yeah.
Let's take it. You want to issue? Yeah, not you.
Oh, even yourself.
So Robert, I hit the download. Where does it go? Is it up here?
And there, right? Good. And then you can open it from there. Boom.
Oh, you're wonderful.
You-
Look at that. Some days the magic works. Extra points if anybody can tell me what movie that's from. Some days the magic works, some days it doesn't. I think it's before most of you, me and Robert, with exception, most of you are born. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that's it. Yep. Little Big Man. So, how's everybody doing? Good. Yeah, forgive me if I misspeak here and there. I'm running on a lot less sleep than I had hoped. Every now and then, I wake up at 3 a.m. for no apparent reason, and I'm still awake. So, what's that? Oh yeah, none of them called me. So, mainly we're going to talk about escrow. Paragraph 26. We're going to key in on 26. We get a lot of calls. Bob and I get a lot of calls about paragraph 26, and a lot of times the calls go something like this. The buyer misbehaved in some fashion, and my seller wants to keep the deposit. So just as a point of clarification, this is probably over speaking the obvious, but the seller, being JR, being the seller, the seller can't keep the deposit because the seller doesn't have the deposit. The deposit is in an escrow account, and it's actually the buyer's money still at that point. It's still the buyer's money at that point. The seller may have to do some things to try to capture that money if they choose to do that. So that's kind of what we're going to go over today, in a nutshell. What's the escrow? What's it all about? What's it mean? Who gets to have it? What do they have to do to get it? All these different things. So, does anybody have any questions going in? No questions. Class is over. So we'll start at before we even get to the agreement. Does everybody know about earnest deposit? It's an electronic transfer for deposits. Everybody is familiar with that? Are people using that? You're using that?
I just had a question. When a buyer questions how secure, more secure than one. Okay.
Yeah, and it works like really nice. And if you're if you have a listing and the buyer agent doesn't, their company doesn't have a connection with Earnest Deposit, we can send them a link and then they can forward it to their buyer. And it works like a charm. Really nice. Yeah, so, okay, so the ways that we could get an escrow deposit would be that Earnest Deposit, which, Bob asked me to talk about that because that's working really, really well. And it cuts to the chase, like nobody has to go to the bank to get a cashier's check. That's the second way we would like it. And the third way could be the funds could be wired. I think we're still wiring funds, but that's more complicated. It's another trip to the bank. And if anybody's doing electronic banking, which almost everybody is now, or, a majority of people are, then they can use that Earnest Deposit and it goes real smooth. So we're all used to seeing on agreement of sale the deposit, right? When we turn in an offer, we're filling in the deposit, and we're pretty familiar with the concept that the bigger the deposit, the juicier your offer looks, right? If you're making an offer on a $300,000 house and you put in $500 for a deposit, it's virtually like nothing, right? It's like nothing. You want somebody to put in, the more money they're going to put in, the better it looks on the seller side, the stronger your offer is. So the question is, is it required to have a deposit in order to have an agreement of sale? No, you could put it could be, that number could be 0. Is it going to make your offer very attractive? Is it going to raise red flags with the seller side, the listing agent and the seller? Probably. So we want to encourage people to put in, a nice spicy amount of money. Depends on the size of the property. It used to be, I think I bought my house in 96. I'm pretty sure I put down like 10%, which was a lot less than your average house now. Because, 1996, I feel like I got a pretty good deal now. So that escrow is not required. Technically, legally, it's not required to have an executed agreement of sale, but certainly a seller and on the advice of the listing agent, they're probably going to throw it back at you and ask you to put some dollar amount in there. And at that point, they may be specific about how much of a dollar amount they might put in there. On the initial deposit on paragraph 2A1, it defaults to 5 days. There you go. Anybody else? Did you guys get the packets? Cool. Everybody else is good? Okay, so 2A1, it defaults to 5 days. If you might want to extend that in circumstance where, people are going to be away, they're going to have a hard time getting to a bank, there's a holiday coming up, it's going to be executed on a Saturday. So you're losing a couple of days. So you might want to put 7 days in, something like that. You might even want to tighten it up. If to show that your buyer is really into this, you might want to put 2 days or 3 days on there. But, that's just so that's that blank is fillable. You can change that. It's not going to make your offer very strong if you have a 12-day inspection period and you put 13 days in before the deposit. There are, you want to get that deposit in and assure your buyers that as long as they play nice with the terms of the agreement of sale, their deposit is pretty secure. It's very secure. If they go off the agreement of sale, for some reason they break the terms that they agreed to, that's when their deposit, generally speaking, is at risk. So in 2A2, you'll see additional deposit. I don't know that I've seen that third number 3 filled in. I don't recall that, but the additional deposit could be the buyer wants to make their offer even stronger. So they'll put in the regular deposit due within 5 days or whatever you're going to put in there. And then maybe after 15 days, there'll be another deposit. And that could be something that would be like, okay, once we get through the inspection period, we're going to put another $5,000 or another $10,000 down. And that certainly makes the offer look stronger to the seller. That's the purpose of that line. So you guys feel free to stop me anytime you have questions, or anytime you feel like saying, no, Dave, you're absolutely wrong on that. You can feel free to do that, except for JR, because he's just going to be talking the whole time. So the 2C, deposits. Okay, we'll go back to 2B. All funds paid by the buyer, including deposits, will be paid by cash, cashier's check, or wired funds, or earnest deposit. All funds paid by the buyer within 30 days of settlement, including funds paid at settlement, would be cashier's check or wired funds or earnest deposit, but not by personal check. We really don't want to see personal checks here at all. We're going to be kicking those back if you see personal checks come through, because while we think our personal checks clear within a certain amount of time, it may show up in our bank within a certain amount of days. Something that I don't totally understand, but it doesn't actually clear for like 30 days or something like that. Like those funds aren't really secure until after 30 days. And a lot of times by the time we get it, that's past settlement. So we really want the earnest deposit, possibly a wire or a cashier's check, because the cashier's check are guaranteed funds. Let me see. Okay, so 2C, deposits are going to be in dollars, right? No other forms of currency, or no Bitcom or whatever, that Bitcoin or whatever that's. If Syed could tell me all about that. He's smiling back there. That's what he's using. And it's going to be paid to the broker for the seller unless stated here. So there's a blank line there. Reasons that we might see other things put in there would be like, I think is it ESP is the main one around here that does not hold escrow. We didn't share. Thank you. Yeah, like if you look it up and you're filling in the broker for seller or broker for buyer, no, broker for seller, I'm sorry. You look up to fill in the broker box, and you see broker for seller is in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or something like that. Just assume that they're not going to hold escrow. Like it's a discount brokerage or whatever, they're not going to hold escrow. So in that line, you're going to write Keller Williams Real Estate so that we hold that escrow. Even though we're the broker for the buyer, Bob, our brokerage is still beholden to the terms of paragraph 26, just like it would be if it was at a listing broker. So no issue there. There are times when they'll say, we want it to be held by the title company. We don't want the title company holding escrow, right? Like Keystone, for one, they don't hold escrow, but we don't want it going to the title company. We don't want it going to an attorney, anything like that, to hold the escrow. We want it to be going to a brokerage. And the reason being, when we get to paragraph 26, it talks about what the brokerage has to do, what the broker has to do, not what the title company has to do, what the attorney has to do, but what the broker has to do. The broker is beholden to the rules and regulations of the state and the real estate commission. The title company may or may not have different rules to follow. Linda's not here. So we want to make sure that those funds are being held by a broker, because then when we get to paragraph 26, we'll know exactly why. Does anybody have any questions so far? All good so far? Okay. So I think we can just go to paragraph 26, and then we'll talk about, after that, we'll talk about the release forms and things. So at the bottom of page 12, on our agreement of sale, our lovely agreement of sale, that all the other states look at and say, boy, we wish we had one of those, because this is just a beautiful document. You'll see the default, termination, and return of deposits. We get more calls about this paragraph probably than any other part of the agreement of sale. When we start talking to our customers, our clients, when they sign an agency, whether it's a listing agency or a buyer agency, it's really good for us to speak, maybe not necessarily pull out one of these agreements, but to talk about escrow and the importance of the deposit and what happens with it and what is the process, right? Especially with the sellers, because again, sellers often think that the buyer is misbehaving, so they're just gonna snap their fingers and they're gonna get to keep that deposit, and that is pretty far from the case. So we want to be familiar with this paragraph so that we can very easily, during our appointments early on in the process, this is one of those rinse and repeat kind of scenarios, right? We want to talk about somebody earlier, a listing. You have a listing appointment, you sign the contract, you start talking about the process. You're going to want to talk to them about escrow and what happens, what are the possibilities with that escrow, right? Then you get an agreement of sale, you get an offer, and they said, that's great, we want to take that offer. Okay, let's review the offer, let's review all the terms of it. Now that you find all the terms acceptable, let's go back and talk about the deposit. This is how much their deposit is. This is what can happen with the deposit. It's going to be applied to their closing costs if everything goes well. If the buyer truly misbehaves somehow or another, you can go to mediation, hire a lawyer, try to capture that. But you can't just say the buyer has misbehaved, the buyer's gone rogue on the contract, I'm going to keep it. It's not that simple. So we need to get real familiar with Okay, I must have pushed the button. Thank you, everybody. Sorry about that. I had the mic turned off. There we go. So there's all these opportunities for the buyer and the seller to decide what happens to the money before they go and spend money on lawyers and mediation and things, right? They get to. Okay, so maybe it has a bad battery. Thank you. Let me see.
So
What's that?
buyer and seller have to agree. That's where you are.
Buyer and seller do have to agree. Even when they don't want to agree, they have to agree. That the distribution of deposit monies based on the passage of time does not legally determine entitlement to the deposit monies, and that the parties maintain their legal rights to pursue litigation even after the distribution is made. Paragraph D, 26D, buyer and seller agree again that the broker holding who holds or distributes the deposit money pursuant to the paragraphs of 26C or Pennsylvania law will not be liable. Broker and seller agree that if the broker or affiliated licensee is named in litigation regarding deposit monies to the attorneys, fees and costs, the attorney's fees and costs of the broker will be paid by the party naming them in litigation. So there, so don't name me in the litigation or you'll be paying my lawyer fees. That's what this says. I don't know if that's probably under the umbrella of smokescreen, Bob would say, but you know, all that stuff would end up being decided by the courts, I'm sure. But it's the fact that it's written here would be helpful. So this says, paragraph E says, seller has the option of retaining all sums paid by the buyer, including the deposit money, should the buyer fail to make additional payments as specified in paragraph 2. That was, you know, additional deposits, furnish false or incomplete information to the seller, broker, or any other party identified in this agreement concerning buyer's legal or financial status. Other party identified in this agreement might be the lender, that's why we put the lender in there. The buyer has to provide truthful information to the lender. Otherwise, they would be in default with a contract. Or they violate or fail to fulfill or perform any other terms or conditions of this agreement. That's pretty wide open. So the buyer has to, we are under contract and we have terms, time limits, verbiage. The buyers and seller have to each do their part according to the terms of the contract. So unless otherwise checked in paragraph 26G, seller may elect to retain the sums paid by the buyer, including deposit monies, on account of the purchase or money supplied to the seller's damages as liquidated damages for such default. So that's why we check 26G so that we limit the disputes of money to the deposits held. And that's why you want to encourage nice deposits, nice big deposits. Because if you only have $500 in there, buyer could walk away. They don't care. Let me out of here. They could ghost you. You want to have money in there that's worth everybody paying attention to. Buyers and sellers, keep everybody's attention focused on this contract. If G or H, if seller retains all sums paid by the buyer, including deposit monies, as liquidated damages pursuant to paragraph 26F or G, buyer and seller are released from further liability or obligation to this agreement. Any questions at this point?
Yeah, what is the agent's responsibility in like the mediation? Like if it does come a dispute, does the agent go along with them to like the court? And everything? Is it
I mean,
court?
not normally, because it's now we're in between, we're with you're going to be in a room, you're going to have a mediator, you're going to have the buyer, and you're going to have the seller side, and they're the ones hashing it out. I don't know. I've never been involved in one directly. It's actually pretty rare. You know, Bob used to be a mediator, so he knows a little bit more about it. But you know, it's we do our job, which is try to get two people together to buy and sell a house, and then the arguments outside of that are between the buyer and seller. They're not between the listing broker and the buying broker.
And all once.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, but that 45 days, the buyer can put in his request for the deposit money back before that, but the broker has 30 days after that to.
Yeah. Well, the buyer can't request it until that time limit is up. Yeah. Yes, that's to give the seller an opportunity to apply for mediation or, you know, file something in the court, something like that. And then at that 45 day, I would say, you know, it's day 45, get the letter on the desk right then. And then the broker has 30 days, which gives the broker an opportunity to check mail, email, maybe call the court, see if there's anything going on that he's unaware of, so that the broker remains compliant. I mean, Bob has a huge interest in making sure that he follows these rules. Anything to do with deposit money in terms of like violations in the eyes of the state or the real estate commission, like that's way up on the list. You know, commingling, way up on the list. Mishandling deposits, way on the list. There was a case last year that was part of the PAR legal hotline, and I forget where the brokerage was, but the broker took it upon himself to decide who got the money, and it ended up. I think there was a fine involved, but the main part of that they were talking about was that broker suffered quite an embarrassment by being called on the carpet in public for going against what's in there, you know? I mean, that would be, if I were the broker, that would be a terrible day and probably a terrible year and a terrible long time before you could kind of forget about that, you know? You know, this talks about the mediation process a little bit. Any agreement reached through mediation and signed by the parties, by both parties, plural, signed by the parties will be binding. So you go to mediation, you decide there's $10,000 there, the buyer gets 2 and the seller gets 8 or whatever combination, 50-50, whatever it is, there'll be a statement issued, signed by the mediator and the buyer and the seller, and then that gets delivered to the broker holding the escrow, and the broker will distribute those funds accordingly. Any agreement? nothing to distribute, so they can just flat out. One, I would say if you look at. Oh, we're back to business. You are speedy. Thank you for your patience. So now that I'm on the mic, I'm just going to reiterate this real quick. The simple termination, the TER form, the plain termination form would be used in the case where the buyer or the seller needs to terminate this agreement and no no deposit has been put into escrow. Because there's nothing to do to distribute for this. So then the next one in line would be the TERAREL form. This notice of termination combination with the release form. This is the one that we typically see because there is money in the deposit in escrow, right? So we're going to have the buyer or the seller terminating appropriately as according to the terms that are in the agreement of sale. Now that you guys are all experts on all of this stuff, you'll only use this form in the most appropriate manners. Thank you. So you have the terminating party, and you'll see up there above the line, it says terminating party because it's unilateral. That's not an agreement. That's just one guy saying, I'm terminating. Too much hot air floating around here, I think. You can leave it go. What creates a draft? Oh. I thought I had here's a paper clip. And then on the bottom is the release form. So this is a combination. This one piece of paper does two things. It terminates, and then basically, as long as it's signed by both parties, love those words, right? Signed by both parties, it decides what happens, and that directs the broker on what to do with those funds that are in escrow. So it'll have the property, the seller, the buyer. The deposit money is held by either Keller Williams Real Estate or another broker. And then the total money held in deposit, whatever that is, 50,000, 10,000, 20,000, and then to the seller, and then to the buyer. Of course, almost every time you're going to see, if it's terminated by the buyer, you're going to see that like zero going to the seller and everything going to the buyer. There are times when a buyer might say, look, I'm really sorry, this isn't working out the way I thought it would. Turns out I don't have the money, or I lost my job or something like that. We lost some marketing time. Let's just, I'll give $2,000 to the seller and I'll take the $8,000. And that's, that's like a good faith sort of gesture that to get the seller to sign this quickly so they can get their money back. That way the seller can get a piece of it, they can get a piece of it. If say it's $10,000 or $20,000 and it's all going back to the buyer, that could be cause for the seller to say, I didn't like the way this is going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to sign this right away. How many days are in 26C? Oh, 180, huh? Well, maybe I'm just going to dig my heels in and let that guy sweat it out for 6 months for this, right? So, when we're doing this, when you're making an offer, when you're negotiating inspections, when you're talking about a mortgage, We're trying to protect the interest of our clients. We're trying to get something accomplished for our clients. We're thinking about the contract, but we're thinking about strategy. Like what's going to go over? How are we going to communicate what we're going to communicate? And perhaps that's one way of doing that. Maybe that's not the right way to do that, depending on the circumstance. But perhaps that would be the right way to do it if your buyer, you know, you have a conversation and your buyer says, yeah, let's do that. Then you're going to split it up. Or the seller says, you know what, we're terminating because the appraisal came in low. I'll split it with the buyer. I'll take half of it, whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and that's another reason why we want to, we want to saddle up and get our buyers or sellers to act on things that they need to act on, right? Don't wait until the last minute to order the resale certificate. Don't wait until the last minute to get an inspector out there, right? You know, the more time you build in, you know, there's always a possibility of closing early, maybe, but if nothing else, there's less stress in everybody's life, and the less stress that you dump on somebody, the happier everybody's going to be, and the probably the better decisions that they're going to have be able to make, because they're not under the gun like that. You know, if you just, you know, if you get your inspections done and today's the last day inspection contingency, and now you have to write a buyer reply to inspection and get it out the door before, you know, 5 o'clock or midnight, you know, it's stress. And on the other side, they're waiting. They're going, geez, I wonder where the BRI is, you know, and the seller's calling them and saying, where's this thing? I thought we were supposed to get this thing by today. How come we don't have this thing today? Right? So, you know, you work efficiently and within the time frames, it's going to be better for everybody. It probably is going to make your transaction go smoother. So then we have the last form, which is the agreement of sale, release, and distribution of deposit money form. This is the basic, simple release form. And why would you use this? Well, maybe say it again, say it out loud so everybody could hear.
Transaction closed on, say, your contract says that comes and goes, 11, well, you have deposit in there. 97 is it's already terminated on its own.
Mm-hmm.
It's automatically terminated at the first sale.
Right. So if everybody clear on that, what he's saying is you have a settlement date. Today is what, the 16th? So today you have settlement. Nobody shows up for settlement. The agreement dies because it's the day after. It say it was supposed to close yesterday on the 15th. Today's the 16th. The agreement of sale is dead unless it's extended. Can you resuscitate that transaction after it dies? Yes, you can. You could have a change in terms and go back in, say, look, we agreed to bring this back to life and we're going to give it another 2 weeks. That's fine. You can do that. No problem. If it does die and you don't want to nobody wants to bring it back to life, it's just over. Now you have to decide what happens with the deposit money. So you do the release form. Now, certainly the buyer's going to want to do the release form, unless sometimes we have buyers that just like disappear. We do hear about that every now and then. Buyer just poof, they're gone. Their deposit's still in escrow. They don't return phone calls or emails or anything. But generally speaking, the buyer's going to want their money back. Sometimes you'll have a transaction and it isn't going real smooth. We got through the inspection part. You know, we're in, you know, the mortgage contingency aspect or past that or whatever. And something comes up and hard to say what it is. The sellers decide they can't move because their kids transferred to a school nearby or who knows what. And they just say, you know, we'd rather not sell the house. Or maybe the buyers say, you know, things have changed in our life that have nothing to do with the contract. You know, we really don't want to buy the house now. We can't do that. So there's no clear contractual verbiage that says somebody could terminate or would terminate, right? It's not clear cut in the contract. So you could just use this agreement of sale, release, and distribution. This effectively ends the contract, right? Buyer and seller entered into an agreement of sale to purchase property. Buyer and seller release, quit claim, and forever discharge each other, all brokers, licensees, employers, and officers or partners, on and on and on, who may be liable through them from any and all obligations, claim, losses, demands set forth in the agreement of sale. It means the agreement of sale is over. And this is what we're going to do with the money. Then the release part is filled out and distributed to be distributed according to what's on this piece of paper. And then broker Bob knows what to do with the money. Broker Bob. Does that make sense? Any questions? You can't tell me that I've been that thorough on that little amount of sleep that you guys don't have any questions. No, just, you know, one of these days you'll get old enough and every now and then you're just going to wake up at 3 a.m. and then you'll be awake for no apparent reason. You're not even the benefit of high stress, just to wake you up, you know, sir.
Question about the inspection reaction. Is seller obligated to respond during that time? Like, what happens if he just goes cold turkey?
Okay, so you have an inspection contingency period, 10 days. On day 8, you send a buyer reply to inspection in. Listing agent may or may not say, oh, I got it. I'll talk to my seller. And then click, 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 tick, tick, tick. Day 9, you don't hear anything. Day 10 comes along. You don't hear anything. You don't necessarily have 5 days. You only have a negotiation period. You do have 5 days. If you don't hand in a buyer reply to inspection, then there's no negotiation period. If you turn over a buyer reply to inspection, he's correct. It does initiate the negotiation period. If during the negotiation period the seller doesn't respond, then the buyer reply to inspection, which is like your Christmas wish list. These are all things I really want the seller to do. If you don't negotiate those things and you don't hear by the end of the negotiation period back from the seller, the buyer has a choice. The buyer can either accept the property in its present condition and all the issues that come along with it, or they terminate. Now, the termination doesn't happen during the negotiation period. It happens just 2 days afterward. Now, in a practical sense, if the seller doesn't respond during the negotiation period, as a buyer's agent, you're probably going to say, hey, we didn't hear from you. I have a termination signed and ready to send over to you if we don't hear back from you. And that may spur them into action. And if it doesn't, by the second day, end of the second day of that 2-day period following the negotiation period, they should come up with a better name for that. But
phone calls and going back and forth. Nothing. Work back to you. We file inspection. Prices you pay on. Take it back, set back, back to you. Why? You know. Back to what you want.
I'd have to think, right. Yeah, you don't have to terminate. You could accept the property with, and the buyer can assume all the things that you had on the buyer reply to inspection. The buyer can do that. You don't have to terminate. You can say, you can just take it on. Do they want to do that? Do they? Right, yeah. That makes sense, what he just said? If the appraisal comes in, it says, for instance, at value with the following conditions, handrail to the basement. That handrail has to be done before closing by somebody. That has to be done before closing, or they're not getting the money. The money's not coming through. Question?
But that's the default. Right, so if they had waited to the initial inspection period and turned in their buyer's reply on the final day, then yeah, all you would have to be 5 days to negotiate. However, if that reply is turned in early, timeline is shortened, but rather the negotiating period is if buyer's reply is turned in on day 10, it's up to extra 5 days of negotiation.
Yeah, yeah, when the turning in of the buyer reply to inspection has to be done by before the end of the inspection contingency period, right? Now, if it's on the very last day of the inspection contingency period, done. Enters into the negotiation period. If you have 10 days of inspection contingency and you send it in on day 2, you can begin negotiating, but the negotiation period hasn't changed. The terms that are in the contract remain those terms and titles that are in the contract. You are negotiating, but you're still in the inspection contingency period. So you might start negotiating, and that could be a really good thing to do, right? Because say there's an issue with the inspection, and you want to get it, you want to get a move on the repairs. Maybe it's a roof or insulation, or there's a leak in the roof and you want to get moving. Some things, it's just like almost like a courtesy. The inspector goes up in the attic, finds there's a roof in there and the seller doesn't know about it. Call them like right away, because you don't want further damage to the house. Give them, as a courtesy, give them an opportunity. Don't wait the whole 10 days and say, oh yeah, by the way, we found, 8 days ago, we found a leak in the roof and it's April. You want to, as a courtesy, let them know right away. Now, just because you send in one buyer reply to inspection, say you're waiting, you found the leak in the roof. So you send a buyer reply to inspection and you check home inspection, right? But now you're waiting for the radon, you're waiting for the water test. Now you get the radon in, but the water test isn't back in. Check the box on another buyer reply to inspection and say, buyer wants you to fix the radon because the radon level is 8 or whatever it is, right? Then you get the water test in. You could send another buyer reply to inspection for the water. And we all like to see all these things come in on the same piece of paper. It makes the life easier, and it's easier to organize, and it's easier for us to process mentally. It's easier for us to communicate this to the seller, because the seller's going to want to know, like, look, what's my bottom line here, right? I don't want to I don't want to, nickel and dime on this or whatever. I just want to know what the bottom line is. So we do like to see these things on one piece of paper, but there are no limits to the amount of buyer reply to inspection forms that you can send over during the time frame, right? So, and again, certain things might make sense. Like, okay, the seller's motivated, they're going to fix things. Send them over the thing about the roof or whatever it came in early so they can get started on it, right? And then as the reports come in, just get their other forms out there. Now, if you don't submit a buyer reply to inspection to the listing side, there will be no negotiation period because you didn't ask for anything to be negotiated. So that period, if you don't send that buyer reply to inspection in by the last day of the inspection period, the buyer has accepted the property in its present condition and all the stuff that they found or didn't find. So they could terminate during that period, or they could send a buyer reply to inspection. And then they would have to wait until the 2-day following if they decide to terminate. All this stuff make all the sense in the world?
Walk through another example of why you might want to do that. Something that maybe you're waiting for. So suppose you're waiting for water test results. Yep. And all your other reports are in, and you want to do a reply to all these other things. Well, you're going to take on that form and check all the boxes that you are replying to, but you would leave the water test or water supply blank. And then you're at the end of the period, maybe, ask for an extension to the inspection period just for, the water test result.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's one thing, that would be one thing too, like, you have 10 days, it defaults to 10 days, the inspection period, right? Well, if you know that, it's an older home, built in 1965, something like that, and, they have kids in the house, whatever, and, you're gonna be advising them to test the water for lead. Well, you know that test is gonna take a little extra time. So build in some time, maybe like a 20-day inspection period, right? And then you can communicate clearly to the listing agent that give 20 days. Oh, just because we're gonna test the water for metal. But we're gonna get all the other stuff rolling. We're not gonna wait. We're not gonna dilly-dally. We're gonna get all the stuff moving, but we may need time for that water test to come back because that's usually a delay in the process. And we'd rather not ask for an extension. We just want to be clear. This is what our intentions are up front. This is how we're going to proceed. So everybody clear on paragraph 26? Our best friend in the world, knowing, is the knowledge of how to communicate paragraph 26. Knowing how to communicate that clearly to your clients will save you many headaches later. It's like many things. If we communicate something ahead of time, it's a lot easier to remind somebody later than it is to try to communicate and educate somebody on something when we're under a lot of stress. Any questions? Beautiful. Thank you very much for coming out. Thank you for your patience out there, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Geez, 23 minutes of lead gen you guys gave. Isn't that amazing?